give a special thank you to the organizers who did a fantastic job and everyone who helped make this happen. So, quick round of applause. Thank you as well to everyone who's gathered here who decided, you know, let's talk about some fun topics. And a very big special thank you and maybe a welcome to every Palestinian in the room who, for us, this is a very different topic and who all of us are away from our roots and where we come from, which can be very challenging at all times, but especially during genocide. So I hope that throughout this course, as we're able to get to know each other better, we're also keeping an eye out for the Palestinians in the room, especially the ones who are staying in Canada, so we can continue and make sure that their voices are heard not just through us, but through themselves, through their own voices. So, I have a very small PowerPoint presentation, and I'm going to be speaking very generally about some of the realities of living under occupation, and then ending it with some things that I think are important to remember as we leave this room. A quick comment on the list of my education. Every degree I've attained has taught me the same thing. Our structures are meaningless unless we have intentional community. So I hope that we're able to foster that spirit and continue moving forward. So I'm going to start this very briefly with a map that many of you have probably seen and memorized and no longer need to see. But of course, when we talk about Israel-Palestine, we can talk about history way before the creation of Israel, with the disparities embedded in the British Mandate, with the realities of living under Ottoman law, Ottoman rule, and years before that. But we can also start, for the lack of time, with the creation of the State of Israel and the Nakba of the Palestinians, the displacement of over 750,000 Palestinians and the leveling of over 500 villages. And so you see at the beginning, the green symbolizes the Palestinian ownership of the land. The white, at the beginning, represents Jewish ownership prior to the creation of Israel. And then in 1948, we see a dramatic shift. The white becomes the Israeli-controlled areas in the UN and globally recognized State of Israel, while the Palestinians, the Arabs, depending on where you come from and your political allegiances, have no state and become under Jordanian rule and Egyptian administration in the Gaza Strip, Jordanian rule in the West Bank. Which leads us to 1967, the formal beginning of the settlement movement, in which Israel was able to, quote-unquote, conquer the remaining parts of Palestine, and then they were able to take some land from the surrounding neighbors, some of which is still under Israeli control, such as the occupied Golan Heights, Syrian territory. And then from 1967 till 1993, we were placed 93, 95, today, depends on how we frame it. We were placed under direct physical military occupation. The Palestinian people came together under the PLO, which then, through negotiations in the Oslo Accords, 93, 95, became the Palestinian Authority and was recognized as the official spokesperson for the discontinuous state of Palestine. And so you see in the third map, just the geographic disconnection between the West Bank and Gaza Strip. And part of why that is so important is because there are Palestinians here from Gaza, and there are Palestinians here from the West Bank, and there are Palestinians here from what is now called Israel, and some of the Israeli-controlled territories. And we cannot meet back home. We can only meet outside of home. We have to meet in Canada. And then, to make things just a little bit worse, we talk about the fourth map, in which we see the West Bank kind of becoming Swiss cheese. We see these settlements, we see these bypass roads, We see these facts on the ground throughout the West Bank separating cities from each other and creating separation within the same governments. And so when we talk about Palestine today, what are we talking about? And I hope that'll become clear as we go through, and there'll be a shift from talking about Palestine to talking about Palestinians. It is important to note that the Palestinian Authority has somewhat authority over areas A and B of the West Bank, so long as there isn't a security risk, which does not have to be defined for security reasons. If there's a security risk, it all becomes de facto Israeli-controlled territory. But you also have these signs. It is illegal by Israeli law for Israeli citizens to enter Palestinian-controlled territories. And when we talk about this is a lopsided map so that it would fit. This is by UN OCHA, which has an amazing resource base on geopolitical maps for Palestine, for the Palestinian territories. And it showcases a few things. You have the areas in yellow, which are areas A and B, the yellow and the light yellow. And then you have that sea of purple, which is the Israeli-controlled territories, a lot of it Area C. And then you have these kind of blood clots, these bits of red, and those are some of the many illegal Israeli Jewish-only settlements across the West Bank. And then something that you probably can't see from where you are standing or sitting is a red line that goes all throughout the map, and that is the wall, the apartheid wall. A wall that is constructed mainly within the Palestinian territories of the West Bank and doesn't divide Palestinians from Israelis, but instead divides Palestinians from Palestinians and divides people from each other. And we'll be able to see that closer in a map about Bethlehem. One of the reasons we speak about this is because living under occupation means living under multiple matrices of control. If you are Palestinian, what rights do you have is highly dependent on where you come from and what citizenship or lack of you have. When we talk about within the land, we have predominantly three groups. The Palestinians without the right to movement, who can only stay in their geographic areas, and they are the ones with Palestinian ID and citizenship, such as myself. They're mostly in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, and they only have the right to remain in those two areas unless they receive express military permission to travel outside. You also have, of course, the possibility of trying to traverse these facts on the grounds illegally. I have an American passport. I'm a dual citizen, and I can wave my US passport at the Bethlehem checkpoint and hope that the Israeli soldier thinks nothing of it, maybe trim my beard, wear some shorts, look a little bit more Western-like, as they understand it, and try and get through. But this also comes with dangers. If you are caught, what happens? It is illegal to go against Israeli military law if you're Palestinian. And Israeli military law dictates where you get to be. And for every Palestinian, we must have our green ID on us at all times. They come to my house in Bethlehem, in Area BA of the Palestinian territories, and I don't have ID, I can get in trouble with them. At least I'll be humiliated. The second group of Palestinians are those coming from Jerusalem, and they're called Jerusalem residents. They are neither Palestinian nor Israeli by Israeli law, and instead they are dealt as immigrants to Israel, and they are considered Jordanian citizens, and many of them have Jordanian passports. But the Jordanian passport is very clear in saying that this is a temporary document because they're considered Palestinian by Jordanian law. You'll also have Palestinians who have real Jordanian citizenship for a multitude of reasons. This group doesn't have the right to vote in national elections and can only vote at the local level. But they do have the right to movement, and they fall under temporary and permanent resident. For those who are temporary residents of Jerusalem, you have to continuously prove that Jerusalem is the center of your livelihood, which means you need to spend enough water, you need to consume enough electricity to constitute Jerusalem being the center of your livelihood, or you as an immigrant can be expelled. The third group we have is Palestinians with Israeli citizenship. They can be internally displaced Palestinians, such as some of you may know Abuna Ilyas Shakur, who lives 20 minutes from where he grew up, inside what is considered Israel. And they can be Palestinians who, for one reason or another, remained in their territories. They have the right to vote in local elections. Representation is a very different matter. And they have the right to theoretically traverse borders. There are some stipulations on whether they have the right to be in the Palestinian territories. Before I speak about this, what happens with love? You choose to marry another Palestinian, good luck. If you marry someone with citizenship or residency that is different than yours, now it's a game of where can we live and for how long. If you are Palestinian and you decide, I want some privilege internationally especially, let me find a nice American passport, Canadian passport, German passport, strong international passport, it becomes a different game. Now your spouse has the right to live within the territories that they have the right to be in under Israeli law. And the international spouse has to apply to Israel regardless of where they live, especially if they're in the West Bank and Jerusalem, for the right to live as a family. Because part of this, as we saw in the land exercise yesterday as well, is that the borders are, for the most part, completely controlled by the matrix of control by Israel. So for me to come here, I had to go through Bethlehem, going to Jericho, crossing the bridge there, going through Palestinian security, going through Israeli border control, and then going through Jordanian border control to get to the airport in Amman to be able to come here. The Palestinians do have a little bit of a role to play. They can deny me leaving and coming back in if there's a court case against me, if I owe money to the government, but that's about it. But I'm not allowed to do any of this if the Israeli authorities refuse to give me an exit permit and an entry permit. So you can see this matrix of control is very strong, very powerful. And what if you want to come and visit us in Palestine? Now, I know I'm speaking to the choir or preaching to the choir, as many of you have visited and come, but we do not have the right to issue visas to internationals even if they're coming to visit our land. There's a visa that is issued by the Israeli authorities for internationals who aren't so welcome, who can only be in Area A and B of the Palestinian territories, but it's solely Israel who has the right to issue those visas for these groups of people to be with us in our communities of the West Bank. All of these figures are before the genocide in Gaza, and I hope you listen to them all with a grain of salt, because these figures change on a daily basis depending on what's happening. The first thing we have to understand is when we talk about the wall, when we talk about the settlements, who's building it? There are many workers, but there's about 300,000 Palestinian workers who are working in Israeli-controlled territories and in Israel. And some of these facts on the ground were built by Palestinian workers, because Palestinians are largely given the choice between staying true, if they are able to their political alignment, to their alignment with justice, or being able to feed their families. If you are a typical Palestinian worker, the average income per month, average, is around 2,000 shekels to 2,500 shekels. If you are a Palestinian worker working within Israel or the Israeli-controlled territories, now we're talking about a minimum of 5,000 shekels a month, with, if you're a skilled laborer, we're talking about 10, 11, 12,000 shekels a month. So it becomes a different calculus. And if we are talking about who can work in Israel, of course there are those who are entering illegally, trying to make money to feed their families, to sustain them, at great risk to themselves and at their families, which we'll hear a little bit more about soon. But there are also those who are able to gain legal entry through the permit system. And there are 15 different types of permits that you can apply for. There are permits that you can apply for if you belong to the church and church bodies. There are permits which you can apply for if you are unskilled labor or if you're simply a laborer. And each permit comes with a different set of rights, including when you can access, from what time to what time during which days, and from which checkpoints. I am one of the Palestinians who used to receive a permit for the holidays, but I was only allowed to access, quote unquote, the controlled territories on foot through one checkpoint, checkpoint 300 in Bethlehem, which some of you may be aware of. My sister was a teacher in Jerusalem at a Christian school, and she had a permit that gave her access from 5 in the morning to 5 p.m. She would wake up at 4:30, be at the checkpoint at 5 because of the thousands of people waiting to get in, hope that she makes it in so that she can arrive at her school to start at 8 o'clock, and then she has to be done at 2:30 to ensure that she has enough time to travel and go across the checkpoint so that she isn't disobeying the law. She isn't allowed to shop in Israel unless she can shop during those times. She isn't allowed to go to the Palestinian land, the Palestinian heritage, or use the resources unless it's within that time. And if it falls during a Jewish holiday, you can be denied at the checkpoint. Or if maybe someone in your territory was partaking in civil disobedience, then without prior notification, you can be denied at the checkpoint. I think everyone probably knows what it's like to be at a checkpoint, so we don't have to go into that humiliation. And I do promise, hopefully this will become a little bit, not too much, but a little bit more lighthearted as we go. Then we talk about the Palestinian prisoners. When we talk about Palestinian prisoners, we talk about systems of prisons and administrative detention. We're talking about an average of 1 in less than every 3 males. And we use here the word males intentionally instead of men because it's anyone with male genitalia, because Israel systematically imprisons and takes children as well. There are 4 men in my family, and my father has been imprisoned multiple times, but he's not a political prisoner because he was never charged with anything. And that's where we have the differentiation between political prisoners and those who under the administrative detention centers. If you're suspicious, or if they believe you've done something, Israel has a system in place where they can come take you from your home, from your community, wherever you may be, and place you under administrative detention for up to 6 months, renewable for up to 60, in the name of security, which does not have to be disclosed for security purposes. You have no right to a lawyer, you have no right to your parent, to a guardian if you're underage, and you don't have the right to know what you're accused of until there's a formal procedure drawn against you, and then that's where you move to the courts and can become a political prisoner. The rate of Palestinians who are found guilty once charges are drawn against them changes from year to year, but it is yet to go under 95%. 96%, 99%, and this includes for children who are tried. And this is where we talk about 2 systems of law. If you are a Palestinian living in the West Bank, you fall under Israeli military law, where you are an adult at the age of 16. If you are a Jewish Israeli settler living in one of the illegal settlements or outposts, you fall under Israeli civil law, and you're an adult at the age of 18. We see that structure having major differences in it, but it goes further. Under Israeli military law, stone throwing is a punishable offense for up to 14 years in prison. Under Israeli civil law, it is not. And we can see these disparities. And so before the war and the genocide in Gaza, we had 4,700 Palestinian political prisoners, taken at a couple thousand depending on the day, and we had 800 administrative detainees, taken at a couple hundred depending on the day. Out of that group, 190 were children on this day, which I believe was April, about a year and a half ago. And 30 of them were women. Since 1967, 30,000 women have gone through this system. And when we talk about administrative detention, we're talking about great abuse, torture. And when it comes to different human rights groups that are working with Palestinian prisoners to defend them, we're also talking about difficulty in attaining records of their time under administrative detention for security reasons. It's much easier to find records of their time in Israeli prisons than it is in administrative detention centers. When we talk about the Palestinian system, the Legislative Council, during this time, this month of April, there were 6 members of the Palestinian Legislative Council who were imprisoned. And we have 551, take or add a few, Palestinians serving life sentences. And now we get to Bethlehem. So this is a small map of Bethlehem. We were talking about the story of the Good Samaritan. We're here gathered a few months before Christmas, of course. I think most people know that Jesus was born in Bethlehem. One of the things we like to share is that around Bethlehem alone, there's a population of 120,000 illegal Jewish-only settlers on Bethlehem governance land, while there are 46,000 Palestinian Christians in the entirety of the West Bank, including East Jerusalem and the Gaza Strip. You can see the red here a bit more clearly. There's the faint red line, that's the wall, but you can see those blood clots, those are the illegal settlements. And so when we're talking about Bethlehem, we're talking about retaining, quote-unquote, control over 13% of the historic land of Bethlehem. I live and sleep in Area A, but then when I go to work at WEAM, I go to Area C. 1/4 of WEAM's land was taken up by the wall, which is right there at Rachel's tomb. But what it also means is while I have the right to change the infrastructure where I lie and sleep, I have to rely on Israeli permits and registration to receive the approval to change the infrastructure of where I work. That means I can build in areas A and B usually, but in Area C we are reliant on the Israeli system, which has a firm hand when it comes to giving permits out to Palestinians, but a very loose hand when it comes to giving permits or just looking the other way when it comes to Israeli outposts and settlements. One of the reasons I wanted to show this map is because we have people here from Bethlehem, we have people here from Beit Zahor, we have people here from Beit Jala, and you can see the sea of Israeli-controlled territories all around our islands now, and you can see them between us. One of the things I said earlier was about the right to practice civil disobedience and the risk that it has for the families. Maybe just for a quick moment, if you are Palestinian, if you could just raise your hand, whether you're Palestinian who lived in Palestine or was displaced. If you're a Palestinian and were told by a family member or loved one to be careful of what you say right now because they're worried about people, about the Israeli army targeting your family or taking action against you, keep your hand up. So part of this is we're not only occupied in the land, but these consequences follow us when we leave the land. And that is why this is so important. It's so important for us to be able to share our voices, hoping that you will carry our voices and that you will continue the struggle with us for justice. But it's so important when a Palestinian, and there were many hands raised here who are staying in Canada, that when they are willing to speak, we create spaces for them to share. speaking of family, this is my family. So my mother's an American. Don't take that against us. She's in the light blue, and she's on the left. Thank you. She has been married to my father since 1990, but since 1990 she has only lived with us sporadically, reliant on Israeli tourist visas to be able to live with us. We were part of a group of Palestinians thanks to an Israeli human rights organization who in the early 90s received a decree that as a spouse of a Palestinian married before Oslo, we had the right to stay as a family for up to 2 years before my mother would have to leave and try and re-enter. In 2018, my mother left in November to return in 2019 in April. Upon coming back, she was denied at Ben Gurion, and she was detained for 13 hours, kicked back to the US, and told she no longer has the right to live with her family. My brother, the one in the middle, he was getting married on May 26th. April 1st, my mother's denied, and if you've ever been to a Palestinian celebration, we know how to celebrate. We're loud, we have a lot of people, we have excellent food, and it takes a lot of work, a lot of invitations, and here we are. Will we be able to celebrate without our mother present for the wedding of her first son? So, we speak to everyone we can speak to, off the record, even reaching the Pope's office. We speak to Palestinian officials. We speak to activists in Israel and around the world, and we are told they are all powerless. We speak to the American consulate. They ask her if she's Jewish. She says no. They say we'll do more harm than good. God be with you. And so after placing a lot of pressure, we were in Israeli newspapers written by Jewish Israeli activists, anti-occupation, anti-Zionist activists. We finally received a response from COGAT, which is the Israeli Civil Administration of Judea and Samaria. We can't even have recognition of the West Bank, right? And thinking of the story that Shadia shared today, right? Who controls Judea and Samaria? Not even the Samaritans are now allowed to have control. We must have it conquered as well. And we receive a reply around April 13th. You may come and visit for 3 months after you pay 70,000 shekels. Now, we are complicit financially. We are complicit as US Americans, we are complicit as Canadians, we are complicit as people who practice trade in this international world of trade, and now we're being asked to be complicit again. My mother has no home in America, she has family, but she built her life, including the house that we live in Palestine with my father. And now she has to decide. My brother is also waiting to get married and very excited to start life. And so we speak to a lawyer, they can hold the money, they return it to us when my mother is no longer a security threat. We have a paper from the State of Israel that we received at Ben Gurion Airport saying that she is denied for illegal settlement, and B, because she presents a security threat to the State of Israel and Israeli civil security. I don't want to be, heightist, but she's probably one of the shortest ones among us and one of the sweetest. And she's a security threat. So we pay the money and then we wait to get in. And then we're told that it'll take them a few months to process before she can come in. We use these networks again. People are calling, people are sending letters, people are using every connection they have. We have people in the States speaking to senators, speaking to high officials. And she receives reply on April 20th that she can come in between April 21st and May 21st and May 24th. My mother buys a ticket quickly, arrives May 22nd. She comes to the border just to be told that the payment hasn't been formally processed and she cannot enter. She goes back to Jordan, We bring her back the next day, same thing happens. The third day she finally gets in, and we begin inviting people 3 days before the wedding. Citizenship or residency. Now, I am married. That is my wife Amelia, who's sitting over there. And she is not a Palestinian.
She is, in blood.
Amen. And she now has to figure out, we have to figure out how we can live together. Do we try and live separately like my parents have for many years and make it work? What about when the little ones come? What do we do in this instant? My brother, who we saw in the last picture, he married a Palestinian from Beit Jala, whose family left in the 70s before the Palestinian Authority was established, didn't get Palestinian citizenship, and before Israeli law, she is not considered a Palestinian. Just like under Israeli law, I'm only considered a Palestinian. My US passport does not give me rights there, which is supposed to change with quote-unquote Biden's agreement with Israel. But as we see the US border open to Israelis, that part of the agreement is upheld. We continue to see Palestinian Americans or Arab Americans limited, not allowed to enter and sent back. This is where I work. We am the Palestinian Conflict Transformation Center. I hope if you're ever there that you will explore it, and that you will explore many of the Palestinian agencies and networks, because we have some fantastic work. And this is where our big ask continues to come. Can we be family? And I don't mean that symbolically, I don't mean that with flowery words, even though Palestinians are very flowery. And when you say good morning, we'll say morning of honey, morning of flowers. I mean it. Will you continue to sustain your fight for us? When you see a Palestinian murdered in Gaza, will you take that pain as if it is your own child? And will you continue to fight until we are all free? There is a huge ask and a weight of responsibility that we're asking you to carry. And we're asking you to carry this because we are all complicit, but also because we all belong to the same family. If we choose to follow Christian theology, we can say that we're all born in the image of God. And that image of God is really struggling and hurting. It is not only hurting in Gaza. Our brothers and sisters in the Congo are suffering a genocide for the technology that we're all using. Our brothers and sisters in Sudan are starving. Our friends, brothers and sisters in Haiti, in Yemen, in Iraq, in Syria. Our brothers and sisters who are indigenous, who are people of color, who are First Nations here are suffering. Can we all be family? And I hope that I can echo Shadia's call and Shadia's words. We cannot authentically work for Palestinian liberation unless we work for the liberation of all. We are all connected, our fates are intertwined, and it is the same foundation of racism and supremacy which allows us to continue to be complicit in injustices locally, nationally, and globally. But as we heard in the story of the Good Samaritan, and in many stories, that is not the way it needs to be. I think, I don't know how much time I have, so I'm just going to quickly, I'm over time. I will quickly end with these two thoughts.
You have 15 minutes.
Oh, I've got time. Never mind. I'm going to speak a lot longer now. Liberation will come from the Jews, right? That was part of the verses there. And it is a verse that our table struggled with, and many tables struggle with. And I think if we can make that more universal, liberation will come from us all. Our fates are intertwined. To liberate one, we must liberate all. And so with that, I just have a last slide of things that I hope we can remember. And maybe re-emphasizing calls to action. ceasefire now. There is a lot of work that we need to do to end oppression, to end injustices, and it can begin with ending our complicity in them. We cannot speak about doing good work, of doing justice work, while we continue to financially invest, even if that investment is through paying our tax, to systems that oppress, that destabilize, that displace, and that murder others. And we don't need to do that. So I hope that we can take this to our churches, to our communities, to our friends and our neighbors, to our own home. Not only let's not buy the products, let's speak to the people who sell those products and let's explain. BDS, whatever we want to call it, whichever program you follow, that is not the end goal. That is simply a tool to place pressure, understanding that money allows for this oppression to continue, that these systems fund the occupation, and that they don't need to. And so we want to buy a McDonald's Happy Meal, but we want to buy one that's ecologically friendly and one that isn't funding and partaking in settler colonialism in Palestine and on the indigenous lands in which it operates. So don't only divest, speak to them, let them know why you are withdrawing your support, withdrawing your money, and no longer in business with them or in business relationships. Second, invest. We have many Palestinian partners, many Palestinians who are doing amazing work, and they need your support. As a Palestinian, we cannot actively or directly end the occupation. We need your support, and we need you to move your governments and your systems of power to no longer fund the occupation or the genocide. So our work takes two forms: educating the outside world, being in partnership and friendship with them, but then locally empowering the Palestinian community. Resistance. Our greatest form of resistance is through existence, and so our second way and mode of operation is through making sure that we're allowing Palestinian community to continue to exist while we wait for our brothers and sisters internationally around the globe to activate, to lobby effectively to end their financial complicity and any complicity with this occupation, and hopes that they will not only do that, but speak about Palestinian rights. Palestinian rights to life, to resources, to agency, to treat the land like it needs to be treated. A desert is not supposed to bloom. Another part, and I'm almost done, is once the ceasefire has gone into place, it is a call to end occupation. Ending the occupation isn't the agreement or what we negotiate for in making peace with Israelis. Ending the occupation is the first step of being able to even consider a conversation. There is no framework in which occupation is justified, as there is no framework in which genocide is justified, as there is no framework in which indigeneity should be securitized, murdered, displaced, or killed in Palestine or elsewhere. And so we must be very explicit in calling for an end to occupation before we speak about a one-state or two-state or any state solution. And what goes hand in hand with that is rebalancing of power and redressing past and current oppressions. We will not be free until we are all free. We have the Truth and Reconciliation here in Canada, but is that the end of our work towards justice? No. And so we must continue. We must cry together. We must hold each other. We must feel insecure and uncomfortable until everyone is empowered, until the balance has been rebalanced, that power, until we can truly live as community. Because at the moment we approach each other with our privileges or the lack of. And it creates two different people living two very different realities. And finally, our life is richer together. I recall a Palestinian person dear to my heart who was oftentimes seen as a little bit crazy or loony when it came to theological discussion. And they would always say, God is most visibly seen in the collection of our differences. So let us make space for those differences at our table, in our churches, in our mosques, in our communities, in our structures of power, and let us place agency first and our interests second. And with that, thank you for your work. Keep up the good work, and come and celebrate a free Palestine with our good food soon, hopefully.